All right, so on to chapter 3. So now we're going to start talking about the cell. And this chapter is going to be really super important because this is going to set us up for a lot of things that are going to happen later on in the semester. Some of it's going to be in bones, but really once we get to muscles and neurons, so really the second half of this course, we're going to start hearing stuff about the cellular level over and over and over again. So I want to make sure you guys get a very good foundation. So I want to point out some very important things. Not just here, but this is also going to translate into 202. Okay, so please take good notes. And again, if you ever want to, if something's not clear, just feel free to email me. All right. So just a couple of things. The cell is simply the basic living structural and functional unit of the body. That's as small as we can get and keep it alive. Any smaller than that, and we're talking about the structures inside a cell, they're not technically alive. So this is the smallest unit, functional unit in the body is the cell. Okay. So if you ever want to go on and study cells, you'd be going into a field called cytology. So that's talking about the makeup and then how these cells actually function. And trust me, that gets very, very complicated. It's amazingly fascinating, but it's also very complicated. I'll give you some insights into that in this chapter. And don't worry, when we talk about some more complicated things, I don't want to scare you, and it's not going to be on exam. I just want you to understand that, you know, these things do get more complicated and there's more things out there. So if you're interested, you can always contact me and let me know, or you can always just try to research it yourself. Highly recommend that. All right, so when we talk about the cell, we sort of break the cell up into three different parts. We talk about the cell membrane, or the plasma membrane, and trust me, this first third or so of this lecture is just on the cell membrane. It's that important. And then the next part is the cytoplasm and all the things inside the cell. And then the last bit is going to be about the nucleus. And in all honesty, in this class, we're not going to spend a lot of time in the nucleus itself. We're going to actually spend more time talking about the things in the cytoplasm and again, in the cell membrane. All right. The plasma membrane or the cell membrane, super important. Again, when we get later on in the semester, there's a lot of things that are happening right at that cell membrane level. Okay, so we'll talk about the different parts, the functions, membrane permeability, so what things get in and out of a cell. So this is very key. I mean, think about how important like the border is just in our own country and all the talks we have about, you know, border security and what we, you know, who do we let in? What sorts of materials do we let in? What kind of trade do we do with other countries, right? All of that is super important. Similarly, it's going to be important inside a cell. Let the wrong things in, and that you can create a toxic situation. Or if you're not letting things in, you can cause starvation. Things don't function properly. Okay, so membrane permeability is going to be very important. So that cell membrane plays a very important role in the proper functioning and health of you. Okay, so we're going to talk about concentration gradients, active and passive transport. So with that, let's just talk about the different parts of cell membrane. So first, we're just going to talk about the lipids. So if you remember, the main part of that cell membrane is going to be made up of phospholipids. Okay, so let's see if I can get my pen going. So are these phospholipids, these little blue balls with the little tails on them. So this part facing the outside and inside the cell, these are the heads. They are hydrophilic, meaning that they will dissolve in water. The tails are made up of fatty acids, so just like oil and vinegar, or oil and water do not mix. Similarly, these fatty acid tails do not mix well with water, so they orient themselves inward. Actually, let me move my picture so you can kind of see the end of that slide. There we go. Okay. The other thing that I want you to be aware of is we have what's known as the fluid mosaic model. Okay, so the fluid mosaic model. And basically what that says is that there's a continuous moving sea of lipids that contains a mosaic of proteins, of different proteins contained in it. And that's really what you're seeing here. So all of this blue is this big sea of these lipids, phospholipids, And then you see all these things kind of stuck in it. These are all these different proteins. We'll talk about their role in a second. Okay. So anyway, the first type of lipid is going to be this phospholipid. Again, that's what's going to make up our boundary. And because they're hydrophilic, they will only allow certain things through, not everything. Again, they're going to be what's known as selectively permeable, so they'll allow certain things through. And that's why we're going to have all these proteins inserted into the cell membrane so that other things can get through. Okay. The other two lipids are going to be cholesterol and glycolipids. Now, cholesterol is going to be super important. And it's really funny because we don't really think about cholesterol that much, except in that it's bad and, artery clogging and stuff like that. But it actually plays a very important role in our cell membrane. All right, so let me just tell you about this. And I have it written down so I don't mess up the definition for you. So at warm temperatures, cholesterol makes the membrane less fluid. So at warm temperatures, cholesterol makes the membrane less fluid by restraining the movement of phospholipids. Okay, so basically what that means is that cholesterol, when it gets warm, you know how things will melt when it's warm? Okay, cholesterol is going to keep these phospholipids together so that they don't just melt away. You don't want your cell membrane to suddenly melt away. That'd be terrible. Everything will leak out and basically die. Now conversely, at cold temperatures, so let's say it gets too cold, at cold temperatures, cholesterol keeps the membrane from solidifying. So at cold temperatures, cholesterol keeps the membrane from solidifying by hindering the close packing of phospholipids. Okay? By hindering the close packing of phospholipids. What this means is that when it gets cold, it doesn't allow those phospholipids to come together. Because if they did, if they solidified, if you no longer have this nice flexible membrane, what would end up happening is basically, if you turn, let's say you have neurons. I'm just kind of back up here. Let's say you have neurons coming down from your brain down your neck, and you do. If you were to turn your neck and these things had solidified, what would end up happening is it'd crack and break. And again, you'd leak all your cytoplasm out of your cell and you'd die. That'd be horrible. So it keeps your cell membranes, particularly in neurons and in muscles and stuff like that, where there's movement, from solidifying so that you don't have breakage occur at cold temperatures. Again, it keeps it from melting when it's warm, and it keeps it from freezing hard when it's cold. So yay, cholesterol. Now, glycolipids, on the other hand, so glycolipids are basically sugar fats, or sugar and a fat put together, I should say. And basically, they're going to combine with something called a glycoprotein, which is basically a sugar and a protein put together. And they form something called a glycocalyx. So let me write this down for you. They form something called a it's a bit hard to write with this, glycocalyx. Okay, glycocalyx. And what that glycocalyx does, it forms a sugary coat, because it's mostly sugar and fat and protein. And it acts as a molecular signature. So it acts as a molecular signature that enables cells to recognize one another. Okay, so it acts as a molecular signature that enables cells to recognize one another. It's important that cells recognize one another, particularly your immune system. It has to be able to tell you from not you. Okay, so it's important that it can recognize the different cells of your body. All right. Now, as I mentioned, you have different proteins also embedded in your cell membrane. So what you're seeing here, we have two different types. We have what are known as integral and peripheral proteins. And I'm going to try to put my image back on because I think it's kind of nice when you can actually see your instructor. Let me try to, there we go. orient my camera so you can see me. All right. You have integral versus peripheral proteins, and basically, let's see if I can get my thing to work. So here we have what are known as integral proteins, any of these circled in black. And what you're noticing, hopefully, on these is that some of these are going to go into that cell membrane, right, part of the way, not all the way through. And then other ones, like these three bigger ones, they go all the way through, right? So they're integral, so they're integrated into the cell membrane. Now, when they go all the way across, like the three big ones do, we call them transmembrane proteins. So transmembrane proteins, because they go all the way from the inside to the outside. So typical things that are transmembrane proteins are going to be things that are going to allow things from the outside of the cell inside. Or receptors, that'll be the other type. But usually a lot of the ones we'll talk about are going to be pores or some sort of channel that allow things that normally couldn't get across. Okay? So you get integral proteins, they're simply integrated or inserted into the cell membrane, and they can either go part of the way through, like you see on the one way on the left, or they go all the way through, like the three big ones on the right. Again, and those are called transmembrane proteins. The other type are what are known as peripheral proteins. And peripheral proteins are called that because they stay on the periphery. They're either all the way on the outside or all the way on the inside. They don't go into or across that cell membrane at all. Okay. So let's talk about some other functions of these membrane proteins. As I mentioned, they form channels. This means it allows, again, certain things to go through. Some of them are transporters. Transporters, and we'll see this in a little bit, probably in the next section of this video series, of this chapter, but a transporter protein is very similar to a channel. However, it's similar in that it allows things to go through. It is different in that it'll have to change its shape to allow something to go through. So instead of it just being like an open doorway or an archway or something like that where you can just like walk through it actually has to change its shape. Okay. Some of these proteins will act as receptors. So they may be receptors to hormones, to certain chemicals. This is very important. The idea of receptors is hugely important. Your cells have to have a receptor on them in order for your body to recognize a certain molecule. Okay, it has to. If it doesn't, it's as if you are not making it at all, or you don't have it at all. So, for example, y'all probably know about like hot peppers, right? Chili peppers and stuff like that, jalapeno peppers, whatever, any of those. Well, they all have a molecule in them called capsaicin, and it's that capsaicin that we have receptors for that make them so hot, right? And obviously, the more capsaicin a pepper has, the hotter it is. Now, some people do not have this capsaicin receptor at all. That means that when they eat like even the hottest pepper in the world, to them it just tastes like a pepper. It doesn't burn at all. I know it's kind of hard to conceptualize, right? But it doesn't. They don't have the receptor for it. There is no effect. And that should be one of the mantras in for the rest of your life in any kind of allied health. No receptor, no effect. Okay. I'm trying to think. Similarly, there's actually a condition out there, and at the end of the semester we'll actually talk about it, where people are born without pain receptors. They have no pain receptors. So they can bash into things, they can break bones, and they have no idea they've caused any damage at all. Okay, so again, no receptor. It doesn't matter how many signals are coming in, no effect, right? So always keep that in mind. And these receptors are on in the cell membrane to alert that cell to whatever stimulus is out there. We had already mentioned cell identity markers, so these are going to help cells recognize one another. Some of these proteins will help cells link together. We'll talk about those when we get to tissues. It'll also allow some cells to move. We'll talk a little bit about that too when we get to skin. It's like when you damage your skin, some of the cells will actually migrate closer together to help close the gap of the area where the damage is. Some of these proteins will also allow cells to have some shape as well as structure. We'll talk about those. Some membrane proteins will act as enzymes. Again, enzymes help speed up reactions. You'll talk much more about that when you get to 202. All right, so let's get into membrane permeability. So as I mentioned, plasma membranes are selectively permeable. That means they allow certain things through, not everything. So you have to put in these protein channels to allow things through. Okay. So what it allows through is permeable. It's permeable to small molecules that are non-polar. So if you remember back to last lecture, they cannot be polar. They're uncharged. So like sodium and those guys can't get through. They have to have a channel. So they are impermeable to ions, charged or polar molecules. Now, I want to bring your attention to this because this will come up a little bit when you get to 202, actually. It won't so much show up now, but it's something to keep in mind. We often talk about water as if it can just go right through that cell membrane, and it cannot, okay? You have to have different channels that allow water through. These are called aquaporin channels. Okay. The fact is, most cells, if not all, there's some in your kidney that do not. However, you have these aquaporin channels, water gets through, and again, most cells have them. And there's different types, but whatever. So you can kind of see that right here. Water is just simply going in and out of the cell because of these aquaporin channels, but you have to have them. If you don't have them, water does not get through. The only thing I'm trying to show you here is that, when you'll see a lot of different kind of cartoony looking images of these channels. I just want to give you an idea that these channels, in fact, are not just sort of these blobular, cartoony looking things. And one of the things to kind of keep in mind that I think makes so much more sense when we talk about these is that, so take a look at this area. You can kind of see this channel is made up of all this sort of, I don't know, squiggly blue, but then there's this part right in here that's yellow. So when we have an ion channel, so you have something that's going to allow calcium or sodium or potassium or something like that through, those things all have a charge. And you know how like when you have a magnet and it has the positive end and you take another magnet and you put the two positive ends together, it moves, right? Same thing here. You have these ion channels have this area in them in yellow here on either side that have like a charge to them. So when these ions come in and they have the right size and the right charge, it basically causes that to move, which then causes this gate to open up. And that's really how these things function. It's not magic. It's not like they just get to go in and like, I don't know, they get scanned somehow. I guess this is the scan. Again, a lot of things are going to work on this positive negative charge basis. So these ions come in, they have a certain charge, like magnets, and it'll push things, it'll pop open this gate, it can get through the other side. So just kind of keep that in the back of your minds as we're talking about these things. I think as we get into a little bit more and more complicated things as we go throughout the semester, like thinking of them that way will help you understand things a little bit better. Okay. Here's the other thing that we're going to talk about like a bazillion times. When we talk about ions and whatever else moving in and out of a cell, we're talking about it going down we say down its concentration gradient. That simply means it's going from where it's highly concentrated to where it's less concentrated. I call it the subway effect actually, but I guess it could be called the light rail effect here in Arizona. So let's say you get on the light rail, right? It's got multiple cars. You happen to get in on a car and it's packed, right? It's just packed. You kind of take a look and you notice the next car down is almost empty. You're going to move from where it's highly concentrated, where it's packed, to where it's empty, right? It's just natural not to want to be where you're packed in like sardines. Ions kind of do the same thing too. They're going to go from where they're highly concentrated and they're going to want to move to the environment where they're less concentrated. Also keep this in mind because this is going to be important. A lot of the ways your body is going to function is by causing molecules to be packed in one place and then keeping them kind of regulating, I should say, regulating how they can get either in or out of a cell. And by regulating that, we have things like muscle contractions, nerve signals, stuff like that. This will come up over and over again, especially the second half of 201. Okay. All right. So when we talk about things transporting across the cell membrane, we're going to focus on a couple of things. Passive transport, just simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and then active transport. Okay, I'm going to stop this video right now, and we're going to continue this concept in the next video, in part 2. I just want to keep these nice and short so you're not being overwhelmed and watching this long video. So again, make sure you take the quiz. Email me with any questions if you like before taking that quiz, and I'll see you in part 2.